to ERM's webinar on safety in renewables. My name is Kane Choi. I'm a principal consultant at ERM, and I will be today's moderator for today's webinar. In this webinar, we are excited to have speakers from the GPlus, Ørsted, RCG, which is now an ERM group company, to present and share insights with us on health and safety topics faced across the rapidly developing renewable energy sector in Asia Pacific. Following the presentations, we will also have one of our own ERM principal consultants join the speakers to participate in a panel Q&A discussion. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, we welcome you to send us your questions using Zoom's Q&A function. We will address your questions during the panel discussion at the latter portion of the webinar. Before we get started, I would like to raise a few housekeeping notes. This webinar will be recorded, but we will only be using this for ERM internal purposes. The presentation materials will be made available after the completion of this webinar. Lastly, we encourage you to share your feedback about the webinar in a short survey at the end of this webinar. To start us off, we would like to take a quick audience poll. Please take a look at the polling question on your screens now, and please select the most relevant response. Just a reminder that you may need to scroll down in the polling window a little bit to see all the selection options. So we'll give everyone a moment to answer the polling question now. Thank you all for responding to the poll. You should be able to see the responses on your screen as well. So it's interesting to note we have the top three, probably the top three sectors or areas where we have the most audience members for now, and a few of you, maybe one of you on the other section. But it's good to see that some of you are in the offshore or onshore wind sector. Certainly we have some topics that we will be sharing and discussing in that sector as well. And hopefully we will also cover some aspects on the solar sector near our panel discussion. If you do have any questions or specific topics that you would like to be discussed or addressed, please enter them in during the webinar in the Q&A section, and we will discuss those during the Q&A panel discussion. So now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our first speaker from GPlus, B. Hildenbrand. B is a manager for offshore wind at the Energy Institute, supporting the GPlus Global Offshore Wind Health and Safety Organization to develop and deliver their work programs. In 2019, Safety On was set up in partnership with the Energy Institute as a health and safety group for the offshore wind industry. B also supports this group since its beginning as part of her role. B joins us today to share the latest 2020 Safety Incident Data Report published by the GPlus for the offshore wind sector. B, over to you.
Thank you, Kane, for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today on behalf of GPlus. Some of you might be familiar with GPlus. I don't know, depending on the poll, maybe not. But I just want to give a brief overview of what we do and our activities in GPlus before I then present on the incident data and focus on how the APAC region actually compares to what we've seen over the years in Europe. So GPlus was launched in 2012 with the main objective really to deliver world-class health and safety performance in the offshore wind industry. Activity started in the UK and Europe, massively supported by the regulator in the UK, but soon expanded beyond Europe, simply because our members operate internationally. Now we are also located with focus groups in the APAC region and North America. We currently have 9 full members, so full membership is open to offshore wind asset owners, project developers who are the lead operators or operators with projects that are in an advanced stage of development, and also open to original equipment manufacturers, the OEMs of offshore wind turbine generators. We also have a growing membership, as you can see in the lower line, on associates. So we currently have 15 companies we are closely engaging with, doing work together in the focus groups, and especially these members are on these smaller companies are very essential in the regional groups where we need their background and their expertise working in the specific regions. The GPlus work program can actually be described with the overall aim in collaborating in industry to tackle health and safety issues. And that's what we do in our 4 pillars in our work program. So first of all, the backbone of our work are the health and safety statistics. So we collect data from all our members. They provide us the data for all their sites globally, and the data covers all phases of from development to the decommissioning phase of a project. We analyze the data, monitor performance and trends, and identify risks. So areas of higher risk identified in these health and safety data form the evidence base for our work program. We then do provide good practice guidance. As I said, driven by the incident data, these guidance, good practice guidance, focus on delivering the right guidance for industry by drawing knowledge and expertise from members, subject matter experts, academia, regulators, and other industry stakeholders. So we can have a robust approach to help and support industry. The third pillar is actually the Safe by Design work program. So this program brings together experts for the purpose of getting the best practice in health and safety from the design stage. So specific topics are focused on in the various workshops, and the industry provides the objective is really to make improvement as a design stage in this joint discussion. And the fourth and last pillar is sharing of incidents, and that's we do utilizing toolbox for real life incidents, hazards, and high potential observations. And Toolbox is a free to use web application which is provided by the Energy Institute. The GPlus now populates offshore wind incidents content for Toolbox, and we think it's a very great tool to share learnings and to discuss incidents across the sectors. But now come to the data. So the following slides, I would like to focus on the GPlus data to demonstrate incident trends in Europe in their early years, what could be expected, so what can give an outlook, what can be expected also in the APAC regions, or better said, give an outlook what could be done better to avoid those kind of incidents in the APAC regions. Here on the left-hand side, you see recordable injuries against hours worked from 2014 to 2020. And then on the right-hand side, you see the derived total recordable injury rate. So as you can see, overall, we have a decreasing trend. Recordable injuries are those injuries that cause medical treatments, restricted work days, or lost work days. For the APAC region, we started reporting incidents into the GPlus database with 2018, and the first reportable injury occurred in 2020. Yet you can see that 2020 saw the lowest number of recordable injuries on record. If you focus on areas of work processes during which recordable injuries are occurring, the top two areas are manual handling and lifting, and the top area where they occur in is CTV operations. So in the following slides, I would like to focus on these three areas. In the past, manual handling caused the highest numbers of recordable injuries in Europe. And even if not many of them were high potential, what means life-changing injuries, you can see that the most common consequence is a lost workday. That can have significant impact on operations. Improvements from 2016 to 2018 were driven by decreased incidents within the warehouse and large installation vessels. But still, manual handling is on top of our agenda because there are still too many incidents, and especially when you look into long-term fitness of the workforce, it's a really important topic for us. Talking about lifting injuries, so there's a less in numbers compared to manual handling, for example, but over 50% have historically been lost work days. They mainly occur during lifting activities in the nacelle, in jackup vessels and CTVs, and 28% were actually high potential injuries, what is quite significant. In the GPlus, we've been trying to tackle this area from different angles. So we joined, for example, together with drops and provided guidance to avoid dropped objects by installing several mitigation measures and controls for dropped objects. We also work together with industry on the design within a Safe by Design workshop on davit cranes, where we actually see a high number of incidents. And also currently we're working on a material handling roadshow. So that's really tries to get from the behavioral safety side and to address directly to technicians and those frontline workers what we can do to mitigate injuries during lifting. The third area is really CTV operations. So CTV incidents in the APAC regions, we haven't reported in any incidents yet, but in Europe, this is the area with the greatest numbers of incidents historically, and reported high potential with high potential in 2020. The most incidents are reported in connection with transit and transfer. CTV incidents are also so significant because one single incident can actually lead to a number of injuries because of the number of people being on a CTV. And therefore, the topic is still very high on the agenda of the GPlus, with guidance produced in the past on safe management of small service vessels. We have now the second edition of this guidance. We also focused in a Safe by Design workshop on marine transfer, and ongoingly or currently we are also doing another project to further improve safety on CTV to do more on this area. In my last slide today, actually, I would to give an outlook and a taste of where the path in the APAC region could go. As I said earlier, so far, we haven't seen any reportable injuries in the APAC regions, but obviously there have been reported high potential observations. And therefore, you can see on the left-hand side in the graph where the trend in the high potential hazardous observations are going. And you can see the areas are working in height, lifting operation, access egress, climbing, rope access. So very similar to what we've seen in Europe in the earlier days. And especially working at height is a process of concern, with all submitted information being high potential hazards. So in Europe, there was also, like you can see in the lower graph, a peak in 2016 for working at height, but the number of incidents and high potential hazards drastically declined and were maintained over the years. And that has been driven by major decrease of incidents within the turbine, specifically in the towers, in the nacelle, and with access to ladders. The GPlus guidance on working at height is available and is under regular review. So it's currently in its third edition. And that you can see, it's a really call here to use the guidance, have a look at it, implement it, and most importantly, engage with us to feedback your finds, your experience with the guidance we produce, and recommend changes and improvements, because as you can see, we all need to work together and learn from each other and to improve the good practice guidance to make this industry more safe. And with that, I close my contribution on my talk today, and happy to lead over to the next speaker.
Great, thank you very much, Bea, for sharing the insights and data on the GPlus report. So up next, our speaker will be David Collins. David is a QHSE manager at Ørsted and had the role of head of HSE for Ørsted in Taiwan. David will be sharing with us his experience on some of the health and safety challenges that he has personally faced, illustrated with an incident and lessons learned from an offshore wind project in Taiwan. So David, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. So good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, my name's Dave Collins, HSE manager for Ørsted. And I've used one particular incident to illustrate some of the challenges that I personally experienced in Taiwan. So what I'm going to discuss is an incident with a vessel off the shore of Taiwan, a site investigation vessel called the Patra Offshore. And there was a combination of events that started with the drill string being stuck in the seabed, and then regrettably ended up with the vessel being tied to the drill string. And then that resulted in it listing up to about 20 degrees, which you can see in the photograph there. And then we had to have a full evacuation of the vessel, including assistance from the Taiwanese Coast Guard. The good news is, I suppose one of the headlines is that went very well, and eventually the vessel was recovered. But what I'm just going to talk to you about is in a bit more detail is what happened that day, and one of the main learnings from that, really. So, as I just said, the vessel was carrying out boreholes and CPT cone penetration tests for Ørsted in the Changhua, Greater Changhua wind farm, and everything was going fine. And then at 11 o'clock one night on, I think it was the 21st of August 2019, as they were trying to get the drill string out, there was a lot of resistance. They persisted, the crew persisted in trying to get it out. But unfortunately, 11 hours later, they'd only been able to remove 2 5-meter sections of drill string, so it really was pretty much stuck firm. They used all their conventional methods that they would normally use to try and assist getting it out. One of them is to use the drill string clamps, which is below the yellow deck that you can see in the right-hand side, to try and twist it and get it out. And also, because this was moored on 4 anchors for stability, they also tried to yaw it using the anchors to try and move the vessel and free it that way, but it just wouldn't work. So the following day, on the 22nd of August, what they decided to do was to fit the elevator clamp, which is the red item there you can see on the right-hand side, to fit that clamp around the drill string. And then as the vessel was coming up on a rising tide, they hoped it would engage with the conical section of the drill string, and the buoyancy of the vessel on the rising tide would hopefully then lift it out. But again, that unfortunately didn't occur. It refused to move, and also then they couldn't release the elevator clamp once they put it in place, once it was tight up on the cone. And so that effectively became a point of rotation. And as you can see, the vessel started to rotate up with the tide, and then within a couple of hours there was water coming onto the back deck there. It was decided to evacuate the vessel. Crew were mustered on deck. There were life rafts for everything. Everything went well, and the Taiwanese Coast Guard came out and took everybody off the vessel, and the vessel was effectively left where it was. With nobody on it, but being monitored by vessels in the area. About 3 o'clock, so a couple of hours after the evacuation, that was the highest point in the tide. So from that point, the vessel was really in no danger of sinking. The vessel started to right itself, and we started making plans with the contractor to go out and retrieve the vessel and get it back into the port of Taichung. That was achieved that evening, and a tug went out. The captain and limited crew went back on the vessel. They were able to get underneath the drilling deck and actually use burning gear to cut the drill string. They also had to cut the anchors and let them lay on the seabed, and then the tug brought the vessel back into Taichung port, where it was refitted over a period of weeks. One of the reasons why they hadn't carried out this cutting initially was they were really keen to try and retrieve the seabed frame, the part of the drilling rig that goes down onto the seabed and is one of the main ways of controlling the drilling and guiding the drill string. So unfortunately, they've not been able to achieve that. But the headline really is that, you know, nobody was injured, nobody was hurt, and we were able to eventually retrieve everything. We went through a process of developing a plan to go back and retrieve the anchors and retrieve the drill string and the seabed frame, and that happened within a matter of months after the incident. So what did we really learn from this? Well, one of the problems that we had was that, well, firstly, as you can see there, one of the things we learned was that our emergency systems worked well. Ørsted have an internal emergency response system. We were able to communicate okay with the Taiwanese authorities, and eventually we were able to communicate not well with the owners of the vessels, and we were pulling them into the process to make sure that they were trying to manage it as well as we were trying to manage it. One of the things that came out of this, the background of this vessel, is that it was actually, so Ørsted had employed a Taiwanese site investigation company. They had employed a Malaysian drilling company, and this drilling company had then chartered this vessel, the Patra Offshore. Now, the Patra Offshore was fundamentally an Indonesian vessel, but to comply with Taiwanese requirements for local content, it had been reflagged as a Taiwanese vessel, and you can see the Taiwanese flag there. What we discovered afterwards, though, was that the company that we had employed had not put anybody on the vessel to coordinate the works. They'd kind of left it to the Malaysian company and the Indonesian vessel, and so there was actually nobody on the vessel who could speak Mandarin. And I think this caused some issues with the vessel and the captain talking to the Taiwanese Coast Guard. And it was our opinion afterwards that had they been able to communicate a bit better, they might not have fully abandoned the vessel. The captain could have stayed on board. They could have waited for the tide to go down and maybe then retrieve the anchors. And then even if they'd had to leave the drill string and the seabed frame on the seabed, we wouldn't have had to have left so much equipment on the seabed before we got back into port. We also found that we were not able to communicate directly with our client reps. Ørsted had 2 client reps on board from Europe. When the vessel was in its normal operation, we could communicate via the radio, but we were not able to communicate with them during this process because mobile phones didn't work out there. There is and we've implemented quite a simple fix for that, which is basically to issue the guys with satellite phones if they're on vessels of this type. So we know then that we will be able to talk to them at all times. And sort of finally, during the incident, the company that we had employed were very much reliant and seemed to be of the opinion that it was the vessel owners and the Malaysian drilling company who should be managing this situation. And we had to impress on them at all times during the discussions, which went on for about 5 or 6 hours until we came to a point where we were happy that everybody was safe and the vessel could be retrieved. That, you know, we had placed a contract with them, and we saw them as being heavily responsible for making sure the vessel was back safe. I'm not sure if this is a you know, this is a cultural thing, but certainly the way Ørsted work is that if we ask for something to be done, we consider ourselves to be responsible for it, even if we've contracted somebody else to do it. And you know, we had to impress on the site investigation company that, you know, they still had a major amount of responsibility for ensuring that we got over this particular incident. And so what this all comes down to is communication, I think. We had the processes in place, the evacuation was done well, but I think overall what came out of this was that had we been able to identify a few of these, particularly the guys speaking Mandarin on the vessel, if we'd been able to identify that a bit sooner and kept that communication going, that would have been, we could have achieved an even better result than I think we did, whereby we could have got the vessel back in possibly under its own steam. Not having to be towed in, and we could have maybe got to a good position a lot sooner, really. In the UK, which is where my initial HSE training was done, and we have these things called the CDM regs. They talk about coordination and cooperation as being the fundamentals for achieving a safe place of work, and really coordination and cooperation is communication. And I think from some of the main learnings on this were that we work harder now to make sure that that communication is always going to work, not just with the contractor that we employ, but with all of their subcontractors as well, to make sure that everybody's included and we get to know who everybody is and understand exactly how that communication can work absolutely as well as possible. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for your sharing. It's a very interesting case that you shared with us there. And moving on to our third speaker for today is Nick Chivers. Nick is a director at RCG, and he's the QHSE service lead for wind. Nick will be speaking on experiences and best safety practices for projects that span multi-regions and multi-cultures. So Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Kane. Thanks for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining, and thanks for having me talk here. So just to briefly set the scene, following from that lead slide, the challenge that we face in renewables across the globe, across multi-region projects. Apologies if it's a history lesson you already know, but briefly, so across the 1900s, late 1900s, we saw quite significant uptick in industrial accidents as a result of global industrialization. There's much written and said about it, but ultimately, as a result of that period, governments across the globe put in significant work safety legislation. Very familiar, obviously, here in the UK with the Britain's Health and Safety at Work Act, and then across, picking one example in APAC, but Japan's Industrial Safety and Health Law in '72, and many countries in between, of course, did very similar things. So we face multiple standards, requirements, and as such, associated attitudes and cultures for HSE across those sort of different regions, different countries. There are, of course, thankfully, similarities, particularly in Europe, where we see our legislation derived from European directives, and there's similar sort of frameworks globally. But that's ultimately the challenge we have, where we have it's still a relatively fledgling industry in renewables. We have a supply chain, and we have experts and personnel that move around from project to project, and often across these multiple regions into these differing requirements and these differing cultures. So how do we deliver a safe and successful project? So if we move on to the next slide, yeah. So if I just briefly share some experiences and learnings we've had from projects we've been involved in. As I say, we see two main challenges, one of which is geography and one is culture, very much linked. But if we look at briefly geography first, so some recent examples from projects we've been involved in. Our RCG colleagues have been deployed to projects, advising clients based at the project or advising remotely. So some examples we're maybe not used to, coming from the longer experience of working in renewables in Europe, moving individuals, personnel and teams into APAC. So things like venomous snakes and scorpions, certainly a learning for some individuals, not used to those sort of challenges. Particularly weather is a very key one we've seen with, for example, monsoon conditions, lightning. So we have to look at the typical risk assessment for these sort of challenges, but then look at how we mitigate those. So a couple of examples there. As with most things today, there's an app for everything, but in terms of having that mobile in your pocket, lightning risk apps were used on one particular project to give a very prompt and early warning for potential storms. And then related to that was provision of shelters at every turbine hard standing to allow the technicians a safe place to get to during storms. Construction risks, we've heard already, typical construction risks we're familiar with in renewables regarding heavy lifts and working at height, movement of significant components. But then we add in some geographies, we have vast areas of site to move those across, and often multiple locations. So one particular site where we had, I mean, you could have almost divided it into separate projects, but we were dealing with significant distances between areas of the same project. So that has its challenges in terms of, again, alluding to what David was saying in terms of communication, leadership on individual teams. And then another example was terrain, just sticking with geography. So particularly challenging terrain, not just at site, but travelling to and from. So again, looking at particular trainings, in this case, specific defensive or cross-country driver training. And then, of course, the challenge of the availability of such training or trainers in the region. So some of the couple of challenges there. So moving on to look at some of the cultural challenges we've had recently. We often see project managers being deployed from Europe, given sort of a longer track record of experience. Clients would request experienced project managers, project directors, package managers, moving to projects in new markets, new work locations, and then managing local workforces. So again, the challenge of a mixed workforce. So recently we've had turbine technicians from multiple countries, UK, Vietnamese, Portugal, Romania, and various others. And then we're trying to utilise, obviously, local workforce. Sometimes that's based on local content requirements. Sometimes it's utilising local knowledge. And obviously the individuals who live in those countries know the terrain, they know the culture and the legislation, so utilising that local knowledge, but obviously working with those teams as one presents its challenges. We also sometimes face new technologies thrown into that mix as well, so being used for the first time in that particular country with that particular workforce. So again, there's differences that need to be addressed. And those present themselves in different language challenges as well. Most of the time we will see multi-language within the project teams, onshore, offshore, perhaps less so in some of the other technologies, but thinking particularly of wind, where we see OEM teams move around and often vessel crew as well from different countries. So signage, instruction, training needs to be deployed in multiple languages. English tends to be the project language, but certainly we would look to provide local language. And in some cases, we find that projects, while they might be a Taiwanese project, the workforce might be predominantly Russian, for example. So we would have translators, we would have the signage and the documentation produced in the most common language of the workforce. Just moving on briefly to an example, things do happen, accidents and incidents can occur still, with all the best systems in place and training procedures. Unfortunately, it's the behaviours that can let us down sometimes. So in this case, there was a crane driver coming down the side road downhill at speed, so lost control. Near side wheels went off into the compacted ground, off the road surface, into the farmer's field, which, thankfully there was no injuries. Everybody was okay, but did result in the loss of nearly a week in time. Obviously, recovery of the equipment and contaminated land. So, yeah, quite significant impact on the project itself. Thankfully, let's say in this case, injuries were an absolute minimum. If we move on to the fundamentals of how we actually deliver a safe project in these cultures, in these regions. We don't reinvent the wheel. We rely on the fundamentals of safety. This won't be hopefully new to many people, but you know, we look at the key factors which underpin safe projects. So good, strong leadership, which feeds to build an embedded culture, and then the robust management systems with the documentation, starting with a top level commitment at policy level. Now, obviously, we do need to ensure that we're locally compliant. So there's a lot of research that goes into local requirements, laws, the legislation, but ultimately, that the fundamentals of those three pillars are where we begin. So if we move on into the actual culture, so in terms of culture definition, it's usually, I like to characterize it as something that happens when nobody's looking. So the organization or the project will move forward naturally in a safe manner when nobody's looking. It's not forced. It's the way things happen. It's the way things occur. But that doesn't happen by itself, of course. That relies on people, their behaviours and the workplace. And I think it's already been alluded to, or we'll come on to particularly after this session as well, is leadership. It does come down to strong leadership and leading by example to influence those behaviours. It has to be made personal. People know when you're going through the motions, and if leaders, if we as managers, as leaders, if we don't care about safety, why should they? It has to be led by example. One example being the person speaking in this slot today was Richard Clarkson. He's currently deployed in Vietnam. He's project director, and he is out leading by example on the site at the moment with the project team. So unfortunately he can't join us, but to engage with the workforce, engage with the teams from the top level is absolutely key. Then moving through to the final pillar, if you like, is the management system. We've spent a lot of time over the years as RCG developing management systems for clients, onshore and offshore, particularly the marine environment where there's additional challenges, additional legislation. And, you know, it is fundamental to have that sort of building block from the beginning of a strong management system that puts everybody on a level playing field, particularly right as far back as the contractual phase when you're negotiating contracts with various parties. If you can manage to get the requirements of the safety system or the safety requirements in at contractual stage, it makes life a lot easier. And again, as I said, putting that into local language or common language as well for understanding will go a long way in multi-legislation and multi-country projects. So to answer the question at the top, how do we, the key takeaways really, as I said, it's not reinventing the wheel, but to utilize these proven safety fundamentals. We've seen it time and time again. Of course, there's differences in different projects in different regions, but we have to start at the base of strong leadership, fostering culture and a robust management system. As I said, assessment of local requirements done at a very early stage. We look at the different legislation, particularly countries and new markets we're not familiar with, engage with local experts, and I think that's the strong offering we've now got as RCG coming into ERM. We've got local teams around the world, we've got technical expertise, but we've also got local experts as well. So bringing those two together, I think brings a pretty compelling package. Yeah, that's our kind of lessons learned from delivering safe projects in new markets. We do get asked more often than not to sort of spearhead into new and interesting markets for clients, which, you know, presents its challenges. We're not familiar. We don't profess to know every single country, every single piece of legislation. But I think if you start with those robust groundings, you go a long way to a safe and successful project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for your sharing. So now we will move on to our Q&A panel discussion, a portion of the webinar. So for today's panel, joining our three speakers is also Roy Fitzgerald, who is a principal consultant based in ERM's Perth office in Australia. Roy helps leaders and field managers transform workplaces, plan their safe systems of work, and organize and internalize safety values on large projects and operations across renewable energy facilities. So welcome, Roy, to our panel. And for those of you in the audience who have been sending us questions during the presentations, thank you. Feel free to continue to send in your questions now as we have the panel discussion. We hope we can answer most of them, if not all, but in case if we do not get through to all of them, you will have a chance kind of at the end of the webinar to leave us your feedback for any further follow-up. So I understand that for a good portion of our audience, we may have some folks who are in the solar sector. We may not have explicitly covered some of the topics there, but I do want to give a chance for us to address some health and safety insights or topics there. So I would just like to invite Roy, Roy, if you can also share a little bit of your experience and insights on some of the best practices on safety that you have seen specifically for operations or design of solar rooftops or solar farms, whether there's any similarities to what other speakers have shared today or any other insights that you can share with us.
Thanks, Kane. It was interesting, excuse me, it was interesting that David Collins suggested that coordination and cooperation are essential components of getting the workforce. And they discovered that even not having the right language, that you can't have that cooperation and that coordination. It's interesting in Australia that we're actually embedding in legislation now, in the laws, that the workforce has to be consulted. So consultation in workplaces, such as solar farms or wind construction projects, coordination of those projects after the consultation and the cooperation of that workforce become very, very important. And that comes back to what Nick Chivers has said, that the leadership on the teams is very important. If you're building shelters for the workers, that's all part of a safe system of work being developed and created. And of course, the work practices that the better introduced there, they're having those work practices of lifting and manual handling, as simple as they are, we need to check and test that people understand how to pick things up, how to move things in a working environment. And those work practices create the practices that we want. It's the basis of culture, is that communication and the leadership. And I think the whole role, and I'll finish off this comment with this, that if you have an informed workforce, if they know exactly what you want them to do, if they're risk aware and they're planning the work before they start the work, and they start to report and discuss things that don't look right amongst themselves, amongst the work crew and to the supervisors, we can learn from these experiences to change things before they start. So I'll just go through that again. Those points are, if they are informed, if they're risk aware and planning the work, if they are reporting situations or conditions that are not looking right, don't feel right, don't sound right. And of course, you can pick up on the learning that we need to go through that. And that may be as simple as manual handling, checking and testing that people understand the message that's being given out through the communication. And of course, that leadership where we're looking after the people. We lead people and we manage objects. And I think it's very important that if we want objects to be working for us when we're constructing and running renewable energy projects, that we need to have a check and test that that everyone's understanding what they're doing. Thanks, Kane.
Thanks, Roy. We have a question actually related to GPlus, I think earlier, but B, I know that you may have answered it in terms of where to access the data. But in case any of you are interested to find more of the data or the or where the reports are, you can go to gplusoffshorewind.com website. And the statistics and the reports, you can browse around there. But in case B, if there was a question on how to become a GPlus member, can you share anything on that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, first of all, thanks. Yeah, all the data reports is available on the website. Also, the guidance documents are freely available on the website. So please have a look. Become a member. Like I said, there are criteria for full members and associate members. But if you're interested in more information, also please contact us via our website, and we are really happy to arrange a call or have a chat and to provide more information how to engage, because it's membership is one thing, but also engaging with stakeholders in the specific regions is another thing that's equally important to get engaged. So please, yeah, get in touch.
Thanks. We had a question earlier in terms of ensuring a compliance to country-specific standards, especially maybe on imported products. Maybe Dave, can I ask you to try to field this question and then see if any others want to chip in on this?
Yeah, I mean, that is what we try to do. Interestingly enough, we did have some trouble importing some hard hats and climbing helmets from Italy when we started in Taiwan, but as a company we have a process. We employ somebody to keep us, we have a system that we pay for that keeps us informed on legislation, and what we have to do with our management system is have it adjusted in each area. So you would have a PPE process or procedure, but then you would have different sections and appendices for the USA, for the UK, for Taiwan, and for APAC as well. So within each country now, and Ørsted have very quickly become a global company from just being a European company. We have a process within the HSE department to make sure that we identify and comply with the local legislation, which includes for imported sort of HSE products. Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. And Nick, I'm just wondering if, considering you also your experience on multi countries, just have you faced kind of any of those aspects or challenges around compliance on different products from different countries?
Yeah, I guess similar to Dave in a way that we've seen technician teams, for example, usually deploy with their standard equipment, standard kit, whether it's climbing, PPE, what have you, which there's multiple assessments done by OEMs, and we've been involved in that ourselves in terms of PPE assessment and compliance. But sometimes you will find that pieces of local legislation will kick that out, sadly. So then you need to, sometimes it can be a scramble, but when you discover one particular piece that means your gloves are suddenly not compliant in country or something. But the key to it, I think, as I said before, is early review of a country's legislation and just a bit of a gap analysis really against your current management system and your current processes and your equipment that you would normally deploy and use. As early as you can do that as possible, hopefully you'll avoid any surprises.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Nick. Okay, I see a question come in. It's related to whether there's any references of best practices with respect to design of PV solar rooftop systems, primarily from work at height risk exposure. So I guess either Roy or Nick, if any of you have any insights on that.
Probably more for you, Nick, I think, that one, the design of requirements.
To be honest, the rooftop PV is not, brutally honest.
Of course, yes.
It's not something that we do very often. I mean, the best practices that we normally rely on within wind and wave is driven by sort of industry groups and sort of body of experts. So whether there's a rooftop solar industry panel or body that can be approached and very, the key to those sort of things is being involved. So we have individuals as others, no doubt from Ørsted and others, are involved in those sort of industry working groups to work up best practices. But those best practices are driven across from those involved in the industry from all angles of the supply chain. But I'd be lying if I knew exactly where to find that for rooftop solar, I'm afraid.
Sure. I think I can add a little bit that irrespective of how well people are trained and how well they're communicating and how risk aware they are and how they report with each other, when you start getting people off the ground, the only way to really stop them from falling or dropping objects is to engineer those situations. So those best practices go back to the working at heights training, the high level activities, rescue planning, and engineering, that we have lanyards on tools so they can't be dropped, because when they drop something, they'll try and stop it from dropping and they'll lose their balance. They will actually undo harnesses to reach out and get something else. And if the work culture, if that organizational culture, if that leadership isn't there, one worker will even assist another worker to undo a harness to go and get an object that's out of their reach, rather than suggesting they can do it any other way. So it goes back to really checking and testing that you've engineered everything once you start to get objects and people off the ground.
Thanks, Roy. Thanks, Nick. Dave, a specific question for you on the Patra.
Right.
So the question is, was the drill extraction method employed, rising tide, a standard procedure with all associated control, or was it an improvisation? And do you feel that such challenges in new markets are in some way due to local content requirements?
Dealing with the first point, no, it wasn't really a standard procedure. I think the guys on the vessel, we actually did a full taproot investigation, and the management of change procedure was one of the highlighted kind of things that could have been better. So had they had a management of change procedure, they might have gone through a process of risk assessing what they were going to do. But actually, I don't think that would have happened. You get a lot of guys on a vessel with a problem and they try and solve that problem. And this was what they thought would work after trying a number of other things. So yeah, it was in hindsight, it seemed like the right thing to do, but it turned out to be very much the wrong thing to do. I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question?
The second part is whether you feel that such of the challenges in new markets are in some way due to local content requirements.
I think they are, but in fairness, I can see why Taiwan is doing what it's doing. You know, it's spending a lot of money on offshore wind farms, and it is entirely right that as much money should be spent in the country as possible. I think, you know, we've been there now doing offshore investigations for 5 or 6 years, and so what it's about now is that, yes, there are challenges because of this requirement, but what we're also doing with these new providers of these services, we're in the process of communicating with them better, and what is really important is building up trust. So you know, we have kind of trust in the markets in Europe with people because we know them, we've worked with them for many years, and so building up trust with them is an important part of that. I think it is a challenge, but it's a challenge that we readily accept because we recognize that that's the way that we're going to be able to develop in Taiwan and other APAC areas. Thanks,
Dave. A question kind of thrown out to all of you, knowing that COVID-19, the pandemic is still quite relevant for all of us. So any specific contingency measures related to this, especially maybe if working in remote areas or other kind of areas where it's not, you know, common practice. So just seeing if there's any insights on those contingency measures related to the pandemic.
So maybe I can speak for GPlus. Actually, we tried really early stage to come up with some guidance to help industry to go through the pandemic and to keep operations going. What turned out to be quite difficult because obviously different scenarios, different regulations in different parts of the world, different situations with local outbreaks, etc. But I think as a key principle is again working together, sharing lessons learned, sharing experiences, and helping to interpret the regulatory guidance that's given in various parts of the world, share what works, what doesn't work, was a really good thing, I think, that was appreciated by our members and stakeholders to get them together and support them in this way.
Yeah, we certainly saw when you know, it's hard to believe it's nearly 2 years in now, but when it first started, I guess similar to government organisations down, you know, it was initially a bit reactive and understanding what was happening as it was unfolding, but very, very quickly. And now we've got a track record beginning to emerge of learnings from different countries and different geographies. But we were very quick to see systems change appropriately. And as you know, PPE, you know, and screening and all of those good things. But we were, of course, seeing things happen in different regions. So we're quite fortunate to be able to take the learnings from one country or one region and apply them a little bit before the fact in other countries. So it's learning at a very fast pace. But you know, as we're doing today, as via Zoom and the communication that we have to hand, we can share those learnings at a very quick pace. And as I say, now we're nearly 2 years in, and we've got a bit of a track record, and hopefully we can deal with whatever may come next in a better way.
And if I can add, I mean, in our experience in Taiwan is you've got to stay as close to the government authorities as possible. Things change all the time. I mean, in the UK, you could fly to Morocco last week and get a direct flight back, but that stops yesterday because different countries take different views. So it's dedicating that resource to really managing this. It's you know, the management of COVID-19 within Ørsted has become a thing on its own and almost a kind of mini department. And particularly with local Taiwanese employees dealing very closely with the Bureau of Energy to make sure that we can keep the vessels working as much as possible and have effective crew changes without compromising the COVID security of the vessels.
Thanks for that. I know that there's probably a few more questions, but considering time, I think we will try to answer some of the questions kind of offline, off the webinar, or follow up based on the feedback and some of the questions that we couldn't get to today. So just in terms of a last kind of wrapping up, we would like to just extend a survey, a QR code to all of you who have participated, and let us know your feedback. And you can certainly also leave the questions, any specific questions you feel weren't addressed yet in the survey. So I just want to thank once again to all of our speakers, and thanks to the panel discussion. And thanks everyone for joining us. I wish everybody a good day. And we'll wrap up and close up the webinar now. So thank you once again, and I'll leave this survey code up. And after this, in case you want to have any of the contacts, we'll also have a contact slide up here. So thanks everyone, and have a good day.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.